The Earth Galactic Defense Academy stood like a gleaming beacon against the morning sky. Its silver towers reached toward the clouds, a symbol of humanity's rise to join the wider galactic community. Inside one of its many training halls, Jack Miller tried to focus on his combat instructor's words, but his attention kept drifting to the group of alien visitors watching from the observation deck. The aliens belonged to the HFY Empire, a warrior race known throughout the galaxy for their superior strength and combat skills. They had come to evaluate Earth's military training program as part of a new alliance agreement. Their lead warrior, Commander Dax, stood out even among his own kind, taller, more muscular, with deep blue scales that seemed to shimmer under the Academy's lights. Jack wasn't supposed to be here. As a first-year cadet, he should have been in basic training. But a scheduling mix-up had landed him in the advanced combat class, and he was too proud to admit the mistake. Now he stood with senior cadets, all of them preparing for the day's sparring matches. "Remember," Instructor Roberts said, his voice carrying across the training floor, "in real combat, you won't always face an equal opponent. You must learn to use your opponent's strengths against them." Commander Dax's laugh echoed through the chamber. The alien warrior had stepped onto the training floor, his massive frame making even the largest human cadets look small. "Your teachings are admirable, but misleading," he said. "True combat is about domination. The strong survive, the weak fall." The instructor's face remained neutral, but Jack could see the tension in his jaw. "Perhaps you'd care to demonstrate your philosophy, Commander?" "Gladly." Dax's eyes swept across the cadets. "Send your best warrior." The senior cadets exchanged glances. They had all heard stories about HFY's warriors, how they could bend steel with their bare hands, how their scales could deflect energy weapons. No one stepped forward. But Jack did. Later, he would wonder if it was courage or foolishness that made him move. "I'll face you," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. Laughter erupted from the observation deck. Even Commander Dax looked amused. "A child? This is an insult." "You asked for a volunteer," Jack replied. "Here I am." The alien warrior's amusement turned to anger. "Very well. When I break you, perhaps your instructors will learn the price of arrogance." As Jack stepped into the sparring circle, he could hear whispers from his fellow cadets. They thought he was crazy. Maybe he was. But something about the alien's dismissive attitude made his blood boil. Humanity hadn't survived countless disasters, hadn't reached the stars, by backing down from challenges. Instructor Roberts pulled Jack aside. "Cadet Miller, you don't have to do this. You're not even supposed to be in this class." "I know, sir," Jack replied. "But someone needs to show him that humanity isn't weak." The instructor studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Remember your training. All of it. Even the basics." Jack took his position across from Commander Dax. The alien warrior towered over him, nearly twice his size. But Jack remembered something his grandfather, an old martial arts master, used to say: "The bigger they are, the harder they fall." The question was, could Jack make him fall? The training hall fell silent as Jack and Commander Dax faced each other in the sparring circle. The alien warrior's scales rippled with barely contained power, while Jack stood perfectly still, remembering everything he'd learned about combat, both in the academy and from his grandfather. "The match ends when one fighter yields or is rendered unable to continue," Instructor Roberts announced. "No lethal strikes." He looked pointedly at Commander Dax before adding, "Begin." The alien warrior moved with shocking speed for his size, closing the distance between them in a single bound. His massive fist swept toward Jack's head in what would have been a devastating blow, if it had connected. But Jack wasn't there anymore. Years of gymnastics training before the academy had given Jack an edge that few expected: extraordinary agility. He ducked and rolled, causing Dax's punch to whistle harmlessly overhead. The alien's momentum carried him forward, his surprise evident in his stumble. "Stand still, little human." Dax snarled, his previous amusement replaced by frustration. "Why?" Jack replied, dancing just out of reach. "Because it's harder to hit a moving target?" He remembered his grandfather's words, "Combat isn't about being stronger, it's about being smarter." The alien warrior launched a series of powerful attacks, each one capable of ending the fight instantly. But Jack kept moving, using the minimal necessary movement to avoid each strike. He could hear the murmurs of amazement from his fellow cadets, but he stayed focused. He wasn't just dodging, he was watching, learning, understanding. Every fighter had patterns. Even alien ones. Dax's attacks grew increasingly wild and predictable. The warrior's strength was impressive, but it came at a cost. Each missed strike left him slightly more winded, his movements becoming fractionally slower. Jack noticed something else too: the alien scales, while tough, had gaps at the joints. Weak points. "Fight back, coward!" Dax roared, his breath coming in heavy gasps. "If you insist," Jack replied. He had seen enough. The next time Dax threw a punch, Jack didn't just dodge, he moved inside the alien's guard, using the warrior's own momentum against him. A precise strike to the inside of Dax's knee, right where the scales were thinnest, caused the alien's leg to buckle. The massive warrior stumbled, off balance for just a moment. But a moment was all Jack needed. He jumped, using Dax's bent knee as a stepping stone, and launched himself upward. His elbow caught the alien warrior perfectly under the chin, another weak point in the natural armor. Commander Dax's eyes rolled back, and his massive frame crashed to the training room floor with a thunderous impact. The entire hall held its breath. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then Dax groaned and pushed himself to his hands and knees, shaking his head to clear it. When he looked up at Jack, there was something new in his eyes: respect. "How?" the alien warrior asked, his voice rougher than before. "You're half my size, a fraction of my strength." Jack offered his hand to help the commander up, a human gesture of sportsmanship. "Size and strength aren't everything," he said. "Humans learned that lesson long ago. We survived on Earth by outsmarting stronger predators, by understanding our opponents, by using their strength against them. It's not about who's stronger, it's about who's smarter and more adaptable." To everyone's surprise, Dax took Jack's offered hand and pulled himself up. "Perhaps," the alien warrior said slowly, "there is more to learn from humans than we initially thought." The observation deck had erupted in excited chatter. The other KRWX warriors were discussing among themselves, gesturing animatedly. Instructor Roberts stepped forward, a slight smile on his face. "Class dismissed," he announced. "Except you, Cadet Miller. I believe we need to discuss your scheduling mix-up." Jack grinned sheepishly. Sometimes victory came with consequences. News of the sparring match spread through the Earth Galactic Defense Academy like wildfire. By the time Jack left Instructor Roberts' office that evening, everyone knew his name. The first-year cadet who had outsmarted a KRWX warrior had become an overnight legend. Roberts hadn't punished him for being in the wrong class. Instead, the instructor had officially transferred him to advanced combat training. "Talent like yours shouldn't be wasted in basics," he had said. "But don't let it go to your head." As Jack walked through the academy's corridors, other cadets stopped to stare and whisper. Some offered congratulations, while others seemed skeptical that a rookie could have actually defeated a KRWX warrior. Jack tried to ignore both reactions, focusing instead on what he'd learned from the fight. He was so lost in thought that he almost walked straight into Commander Dax, who was waiting near the simulation room. The alien warrior's imposing figure blocked the entire hallway, causing nearby cadets to take different routes to avoid him. "Cadet Miller," Dax rumbled, his scaled face unreadable. Walk with me. It wasn't exactly a request. Jack fell into step beside the commander, noting how the alien had to slow his stride to match human pace. They made their way to one of the Academy's observation decks, where Earth's gleaming cityscape stretched out below them, and the stars twinkled above. Your victory has caused quite a stir among my people, Dax said, breaking the silence. The KRWX Council has been discussing it for hours. Jack's stomach tightened. I hope I haven't caused any diplomatic problems. To his surprise, Dax laughed, a deep, resonating sound. Quite the opposite. You've taught us something valuable about humans. The commander turned to face him. We KRWX have always believed that physical superiority was the key to military success. We looked at humans, so soft, so small, and saw weakness. But strength isn't everything, Jack said quietly. No, Dax agreed. It isn't. Your species survived on a death world, evolved alongside predators that should have eliminated you. Instead, you thrived. You reached the stars not through overwhelming power, but through. He seemed to search for the right word, adaptability. The commander gestured toward the city below. Look at what your people have built. While we KRWX focused on creating better warriors, humans created better ways of thinking, better strategies, better technology. You turn weaknesses into strengths. Jack thought about this. The KRWX Empire is still one of the most powerful forces in the galaxy. Power without wisdom is like a weapon without aim, Dax said, surprising Jack with the philosophical tone. Today, you aimed very well indeed. He turned back to the view. The Council has decided to expand our alliance with Earth. We want to establish an exchange program, KRWX warriors training alongside human cadets, learning from each other. Really? Jack couldn't hide his excitement. That would be incredible. Indeed. And they want you to help design the training program. Dax's expression became serious. You showed us that there's more to combat than raw strength. Now we want to learn what else we've been missing. Jack felt overwhelmed by the responsibility, but also honored. I'll do my best, Commander. Of course you will. You're human, you adapt. Dax placed a massive hand on Jack's shoulder, careful not to use too much pressure. But first, you must teach me that move you used. The one where you turned my own momentum against me. It was, most effective. For the first time since their fight, Jack grinned. It's all about understanding leverage and center of gravity. Even a KRWX warrior has to follow the laws of physics. As they began discussing combat techniques, Jack realized something important. Sometimes the greatest victories weren't about defeating an enemy, but about turning them into allies. His grandfather would have been proud. 1 month after the famous sparring match, the Earth Galactic Defense Academy had changed dramatically. Blue-scaled KRWX warriors now trained alongside human cadets in several specialized classes. Jack found himself at the center of it all, helping to bridge the gap between the two species' different fighting styles. Today's challenge was particularly interesting. The Academy had set up a complex obstacle course in the main training hall, designed to test both strength and strategy. Teams would be mixed, 1 human, 1 KRWX, and they'd have to work together to complete it. Remember, Jack addressed the assembled group, this isn't about who's fastest or strongest. It's about cooperation. Each species has different advantages. Use them. Commander Dax, who had stayed on Earth as the program's KRWX supervisor, nodded in approval. Over the past month, he'd become one of Jack's strongest supporters, though he still demanded weekly rematch fights, which Jack sometimes even won. The obstacle course looked intimidating. It started with a high wall that required climbing, followed by a series of narrow beams over a foam pit, then a maze filled with electronic sensors, and finally a heavy door that needed both strength and precise timing to open. "First team up," Instructor Roberts called out. "Miller and Grip, you're showing us how it's done." Jack looked at his partner, a young HFY warrior named Grip. She was smaller than Dax but still towered over Jack, and she had a reputation for being one of the most agile among her kind. They had trained together before, but never like this. "Ready?" Jack asked. Grip nodded, her scales shimmering with anticipation. "Let's show them what true partnership looks like." They approached the wall. In the past, HFY warriors would have simply powered through such obstacles, often damaging equipment in the process. But Grip had learned from training with humans. She crouched down, creating a stepping platform with her hands. Jack took a running start, stepped into her palms, and she launched him upward with controlled strength. He grabbed the top of the wall, quickly secured himself, then reached down to help pull her up as she jumped. Their combined technique was faster than either species could have managed alone. The narrow beams presented a different challenge. HFY warriors typically struggled with balance due to their size, while humans found it easier. Jack went first, demonstrating the best foot positions. Grip followed carefully, using Jack's guidance to maintain her balance. When she wobbled once, Jack's quick hand on her arm helped steady her. In the maze, they faced their biggest challenge. The electronic sensors were sensitive to both movement and heat, and the HFY naturally ran hotter than humans. Jack pulled out a small device he'd prepared, a basic heat deflector he'd developed with help from the Academy's engineering department. "Trust me," he said, attaching it to Grip's armor. The HFY warrior nodded, and together they navigated the maze, combining Jack's technical solution with Grip's natural ability to sense electrical fields, a HFY trait that humans were just beginning to understand. Finally, they reached the heavy door. This was where most teams failed. The door needed to be lifted and pushed simultaneously, with exact timing. Too much strength would trigger a lockdown, too little wouldn't move it at all. Together, Grip said, positioning herself on one side. Like in practice. Jack took his position on the other side. They had spent hours perfecting this technique. On 3. 1, 2, 3. Grip provided the raw power while Jack guided the direction and timing. The door moved smoothly, opening exactly as designed. They stepped through together, completing the course in record time. The training hall erupted in cheers, both human and HFY voices joining together. Even Instructor Roberts looked impressed. "That," he announced, "is exactly what this program is about. Different strengths, working in harmony." Commander Dax stepped forward, his expression proud. "Well done, both of you. But now we have a new problem." "What's that?" Jack asked, still catching his breath. "The other teams will expect you to teach them how you did it," Dax rumbled with amusement. "And some of us are not as patient as Grip." Teaching proved harder than doing. Over the next few weeks, Jack and Grip worked with the other teams, but progress was frustratingly slow. Some HFY warriors still relied too heavily on their strength, while some human cadets remained intimidated by their alien partners. The success of the first demonstration seemed almost impossible to replicate. "You're thinking about it wrong," Jack told a frustrated human cadet named Tom, who had just failed the obstacle course for the 5th time with his HFY partner, Blast. "You're trying to compete with each other instead of complement each other." "Easy for you to say," Tom growled, nursing a bruised shoulder. "Your partner actually listens. Blast just charges ahead like a bull in a china shop." Nearby, Blast snorted, his scales darkening with anger. "If you weren't so slow and hesitant, we would have succeeded by now." Jack saw the partnership falling apart before his eyes. He looked at Grip, who had been observing quietly, and an idea formed. "Both of you, come with us. we're going to try something different. He led them to one of the smaller training rooms, where the Academy had set up various team-building exercises. But instead of using those, Jack pulled out a simple blindfold. "What's this supposed to prove?" Blast demanded. "Everything," Jack replied. "Blast, you're going to wear the blindfold. Tom will be your eyes. No strength allowed, you have to rely completely on his guidance to navigate through the room." Both partners looked skeptical, but they agreed to try. Jack and Grip set up a simple obstacle course using training mats and poles. Then Blast put on the blindfold, and the exercise began. The first attempt was a disaster. Blast knocked over half the obstacles, and Tom's directions were unclear and panicked. But something interesting happened during their second try. They started talking to each other. Really talking. "Smaller steps," Tom suggested, his voice growing more confident. "Your stride is 3 times mine. When I say step, think small step." Blast, unable to rely on his strength or sight, began listening more carefully. "Tell me sooner when to turn. My balance is different from yours." By their 5th attempt, they had developed their own rhythm. Tom's instructions became more precise, and Blast's movements more controlled. When they finally completed the course without touching a single obstacle, both of them were grinning. "Now you're getting it," Jack said. "Every partnership has to find its own way of working together. Grip and I succeeded because we learned to trust each other's strengths and compensate for each other's weaknesses." Grip nodded. "Among my people, we have a saying, the strongest warrior still needs eyes in the back of their head. Working with humans has taught us that sometimes those eyes can belong to someone else." The lesson seemed to sink in. Over the next few days, Tom and Blast's performance on the main obstacle course improved dramatically. They developed their own techniques, different from Jack and Grip's but equally effective. Other teams started finding their own unique approaches too. Commander Dax watched all of this with growing satisfaction. One evening, he called Jack to his office. "The Council has received my latest report," he said. "They're impressed. Very impressed." "That's good news," Jack replied, though he sensed there was more. "They want to expand the program. Not just to other academies, but to active military units." Dax's expression grew serious. "They're talking about creating the first joint human KRYX special operations teams." Jack felt a mix of excitement and anxiety. "Are we ready for that?" "Ready or not, it's happening. The galaxy is changing, and what we're doing here is part of that change." Dax stood and walked to his window, looking out at the setting sun. "They want you and Grip to help train the first team." "Us? But we're still students ourselves. Sometimes the best teachers are those who have just learned the lessons themselves." Dax turned back to face him. "Besides, we're about to face challenges that neither of our species can handle alone." The briefing room was packed with both human and KRYX military leaders. Jack and Grip sat near the front, feeling out of place among the decorated officers. On the main screen, a star map showed a region of space marked in pulsing red. Admiral Thompson, Earth's highest-ranking officer at the Academy, stood up. 3 days ago, we lost contact with our research outpost in the Epsilon sector. The KRYX Empire lost contact with 2 of their patrol ships in the same region within hours of our outpost going dark. Commander Dax stepped forward. "Our long-range sensors detect unusual energy signatures in the area. They don't match any known species technology." He paused, his scales darkening with concern. "We believe we're dealing with a new threat, one that neither humans nor KRYX have encountered before." The room erupted in worried murmurs. Jack felt Grip tense beside him. The Epsilon sector was supposed to be safe, protected by both human and KRYX forces as part of their alliance. Initial reports suggest an advanced species with technology that can disable both human and HFY systems, Admiral Thompson continued. Our traditional military responses have proven ineffective. That's why we're implementing a new strategy, one based on the successful training program here at the Academy. Dax's voice carried across the room. We're forming the first joint special operations team. Human ingenuity combined with HFY strength, working together as one unit. Cadet Miller and Warrior Grip will assist in training this team, as they have demonstrated the most successful partnership we've seen. Jack's heart raced. Training other cadets was one thing, but preparing a special ops team for a real threat? He glanced at Grip, who gave him a subtle nod of encouragement. There's more, Admiral Thompson said grimly. We've received a transmission from the edge of the affected region. Playing it now. The screen flickered to life, showing a distorted image of a human scientist. Behind her, strange shadows moved in ways that seemed to defy physics. This is Dr. Wells from Epsilon Station. We're under attack by something we don't understand. They can adapt to our weapons, learn from our tactics. Traditional military force is useless. We need something they can't predict. Something they can't adapt to. If anyone receives this, please, the transmission cut off abruptly. Commander Dax addressed the room. This enemy adapts to predictable patterns of attack. Single-species tactics won't work. But our training program has shown that the combination of human and HFY abilities creates unpredictable, innovative strategies. That's what we need now. The joint team will deploy in 48 hours, Admiral Thompson announced. Miller, Grip, you have until then to prepare them. Choose your trainees carefully. Lives depend on it. After the briefing, Jack and Grip walked through the Academy's corridors in silence, processing the enormity of their task. Finally, Grip spoke. We should start with Tom and Blast. Jack nodded. They learned to work together despite their differences. Plus, Tom's background in computer systems could be valuable. And Blast's thermal sensing abilities are the strongest I've seen, Grip added. We'll need that if we're dealing with an enemy that can hide from traditional sensors. They spent the next hour reviewing potential team members, looking for pairs who could work together effectively. Jack couldn't help but marvel at how far they'd come, from a simple sparring match to preparing for a real military operation. Having doubts? Grip asked, noticing his expression. Wouldn't you? Jack replied. A few months ago, I was just a cadet in the wrong class. Now we're training a team to face an unknown enemy that can adapt to our tactics. Grip's scaled hand rested on his shoulder. Remember what you taught us, strength isn't everything. The enemy may adapt to our individual abilities, but they won't expect what we can do together. Jack took a deep breath. Then let's show them something they've never seen before. 48 hours passed in a blur of intense training. Jack and Grip had selected 6 pairs of human HFY teams, each bringing unique skills to the mission. Now they stood in the hangar bay of the Joint Command ship, preparing for their first real operation together. Tom and Blast were checking their hybrid equipment, custom-designed gear that combined human technology with HFY's biological enhancements. The other teams were doing final system checks, their movements showing the smooth coordination that came from countless hours of practice. Commander Dax approached Jack as the teams made their preparations. The enemy vessels have been spotted near the research station. They're unlike anything we've seen, ships that seem to change their structure as they move. Then we'll have to change faster, Jack replied, checking his tactical display. The plan was bold. While the main fleet distracted the enemy, the joint teams would infiltrate the research station to rescue survivors and gather intelligence about their new adversary. Grip joined them, her combat armor gleaming under the hangar lights. All teams report ready. We move in 15 minutes. The mission began smoothly enough. Their stealth approach to the station went undetected, thanks to a combination of human cloaking technology and HFY's energy masking techniques. But as they approached the station's main airlock, they got their first real look at what they were facing. Shadowy figures moved around the station's exterior, beings that seemed to shift between solid and energy states at will. Traditional sensors couldn't get a clear reading on them. "They're adapting to our scanning frequencies," Tom reported from his position. "Every time we find a way to track them, they change their pattern." "Then we change too," Jack said. He turned to the teams. "Remember your training. Don't fall into predictable patterns. Keep them guessing." The first engagement came as they breached the station. The shadow beings attacked in waves, each assault different from the last. But the human HFY's teams proved even more adaptable. When energy weapons proved ineffective, they switched to HFY's thermal attacks combined with human electromagnetic pulses. When the beings adapted to that, they changed tactics again. "They're learning," Blast growled, his scales glowing with combat energy. "But so are we." The teams fought their way through the station, rescuing survivors as they went. Dr. Wells was found alive, though barely conscious, in the main laboratory. Her data proved invaluable. The shadow beings weren't just adapting, they were evolving, getting stronger with each encounter. But so was the human HFY's partnership. The final battle came in the station's central hub. The shadow beings had cornered them, cutting off their escape routes. Traditional military doctrine would have called for a fighting retreat. Instead, Jack looked at Grip and smiled. "Remember our first lesson?" he asked. Grip's scales shimmed with understanding. "Use their strength against them." What followed was a display of combat that neither species could have achieved alone. Human ingenuity combined with HFY's power in ways the enemy couldn't predict. Teams moved in perfect sync, each pair covering the other's weaknesses while amplifying their strengths. When the shadow beings adapted to physical attacks, the teams switched to technological warfare. When they adapted to that, the teams changed again. It was a constant dance of innovation and adaptation, with the human HFY's teams always one step ahead. Finally, faced with an enemy they couldn't predict or overcome, the shadow beings retreated. The station was secured, its survivors saved, and valuable data about the new threat was collected. Hours later, back on the command ship, Commander Dax found Jack and Grip watching the stars from the observation deck. "The Council wants a full report," he said. "They want to know how we achieved victory against an apparently superior force." Jack looked at Grip, then at the other teams celebrating their success. "Tell them it's simple," he said. "We won because we stopped seeing our differences as weaknesses and started seeing them as strengths. We won because we learned that true power isn't about domination, it's about cooperation." "And adaptation," Grip added with a smile. "Yes," Jack agreed, remembering that first sparring match that had started it all. "But most importantly, we won because we learned to do it together." Commander Dax nodded, his expression proud. "Perhaps that was the lesson we needed all along."